Hello, thanks for listening to this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, where we share insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever sector you work in and wherever you do your work. I'm Kyle Hannon. I work in the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of London's financial district. This episode is all about blockchain and much more. And even though we don't specifically mention it in the title, which is, will it work? Speeding tech adoptions with tacit digital duplicates. It's quite a mouthful. The person who'll make it all make sense is our expert guest, David Jarczyk. He's based in Illinois in the USA. He is principal in KPMG's Tax Innovation Group. He's the firm's tax blockchain leader. His team and his particular work focuses on bridging the gap between technology, big data, and business cases, as well as user needs. So he'll give us some great understandings of what blockchain has to do with the work we do in the sector. As lead tax and finance partner for the firm's blockchain initiative, our guest was a founder and CEO of a successful intellectual property technology company. He did that for 10 years. He was founder and head of client services for an economics and valuation firm for about 5 years before that. So David is a true entrepreneur and an economist who is quite literally helping to transform the way a Big Four accounting firm approaches technology and the way it helps its clients disrupt and improve their normal processes. So he's definitely the right person to give us an inside track on how the blockchain technology of today is being tested in new ways. And now him and the team he works with are using the concept of what they call digital duplicates to pioneer new models and innovative uses for the technology that we're seeing being rolled out in businesses across the world. They are doing this by building small tech-enabled companies within KPMG and using these companies as pioneers of these new blends of tech disruption and blending it with common sense business. And they're doing it in a way that can scale quickly when the time is right. And then we take it down to the practical core at the heart of all of this. How do we link this all to the people? Because without the people, none of these digital transformations will deliver on their full promise. So let's get started with this week's conversation. Hello, David. Where are you joining us from today?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm in the rural area, hour and a half outside of Chicago, Illinois, where I live with my family. It's a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to this podcast.
So, David, I've said quite a lot about you and the work you're already doing. So what have I left out? What else are you working on? And how does it connect with our topic today?
Well, I think to connect it all together, one of the pieces that's implicit and maybe not always obvious is not only is there a disconnect between a startup mentality or an entrepreneurial mentality and large firms with their cultures, but there's the expected challenges that come with that when trying to implement a startup within a large organization. So one of the underlying assumptions in everything that we discuss today and everything my team is doing is that the startup model, it can work in large firms. There's a daily effort by a smart, passionate team of mine that really work with leaders of the firm, all the way through to the first newest interns of the firm, to ensure that there is this startup mentality and what it means for them. I think we take a step back and look at that. The question, the hypothesis, more than the question, the hypothesis is a startup mentality can work in a large firm, and then not only within our firm, but also for our clients as well. They need to accept that mentality as well when it comes to implementing new technologies, new innovations, new ideas.
We're listened to in about 160 countries around the world. KPMG is definitely a name that's recognized. Give us a quick sense of your particular team there. How big is it? When you talk about the scale at which you may be working, how many offices or countries do they work in? Just so we get a sense of, when you say large scale, what it means.
So effectively, KPMG is a multinational organization, no different than the Dow 30, the largest firms in the world. There are offices in every major country, possibly every major city and second city of every major country, with hundreds of thousands of employees globally. One of the things that our firm does, which basically every multinational firm does, is it has its own regions, its own sectors, its own divisions, etc. And within those, there are teams that work to accomplish many tasks for our clients, whether it be in audit, whether it be in advisory or in tax and back office finance.
That's why when you talk about your core expertise being in blockchain, but coupling that with a kind of a nimble startup mindset, that's quite unusual when you see that used inside a company that operates at the scale that you've just told us about. So why did you develop your skills in this direction, going from your startup, your entrepreneurial background, now you've brought them into what you're doing at KPMG? How are you using those skills in the work you're doing today?
Frankly, I had no choice. Life just took me in the direction of becoming an entrepreneur. I've been doing this for over 20 years as an entrepreneur, and it's just the way that my intuition and my thoughts and my experiences have taught me to operate. I wish I could say that, I'm right even 90% of the time, let alone 50% of the time. But as an entrepreneur, you learn that you're right probably less than 10% of the time. And by wearing the many hats of an entrepreneur, from CEO to head of sales to developer to, accountant and HR and tax provider and all that, really, there's no other way than to think holistically about a problem. But you're doing all of that while being broke, right? Because implicitly, entrepreneurs are broke. True entrepreneurs, that is, are broke in the beginning of their projects. So to bring that skill set in and look at how an organization such as KPMG can innovate both for ourselves and for our clients, the questions we have to ask is, how would I do this if I was broke? How would I do this in a nimble startup way, away from the legacy systems and the legacy processes? That alone will dictate the path that we move forward in. And frankly, and I say humbly, for someone who's been doing this for 20 years, it's just implicit. Sometimes some of the most interesting internal discussions are me saying something that seems so simple and trite and perhaps a platitude, and those within the large organization saying, yeah, but what are the details behind that? And the point is, there are no details, right? Part of the startup culture, part of a lean startup mentality is you have your assumptions and hypotheses, and you go and you speak to your clients, whether internally or externally. And those clients are a handful of stakeholders, and you get input right away. Sometimes that input is, wow, this is the greatest idea in the world. And then you move forward with the next step. A lot of times the idea is there's no way in heck anyone's going to accept this. That's fine. You pivot or you take it behind the barn and shoot the idea. But see, it's just a process where you have an idea, you get your assumptions, and you go. I've heard funny stories, not necessarily from KPMG, but in various readings of how other companies work. Market studies in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars to see if a client wants something. Well, there's no such thing in entrepreneurship. You build a beta version, you put something out, and you give it for free, and you hope to God people like it. And when they don't, you change it. And that is sort of the Wild West gunslinger attitude that comes with a startup mentality, at least the way I apply it.
It's one of the mindsets behind the way that we put this podcast series together, because many podcasts are made using just one host and perhaps put together in a studio. And what we do at the association is we use a small team of podcast hosts. We record from conference rooms. We record from offices from all around the world. We don't have studios. We don't just have one presenter. So there's a variety of voices. You may hear people talking in the background. The fact is, we're doing what we do because we are hard at work while we're doing this. And quite often you can hear that going on in the background. And these are the realities of the modern day workplace. And as you said, when you talk to clients, they're often wanting to ask two questions. The one is, will it work? And if it does, how quickly can it be rolled out? And that's exactly why we've called this episode, Will It Work? Speeding Tech Adoption with Tacit Digital Duplicate. So why is this combination of questions, the question about will it work and how quickly, why is that so important right now?
Yeah, that is really a magic question that I credit you with for coming up in our previous talks. You know, if we really look at what's happening in the marketplace, with large organizations, medium-sized organizations, and frankly, even small startups, there's a market need to speed up technology adoption. That's it. Tech is coming at us so quickly in our personal lives, and we believe we have ways that it can help us in our business lives. And yet every day at work we hear, whether it's from news or companies or earnings calls, that really a company that's large scale, they're having trouble adopting technology, whether it's getting all their data on the cloud, and that's a rather large undertaking, to something small scale, like you just mentioned, allowing employees to work from home or from remote sites or from anywhere in the country or the globe. All of these issues big firms have because how did they grow? Many legacy systems. Many legacy systems that take time to build, and by the time they're operational, chances are things have changed. Companies reorganize, companies add and remove employees or let go employees. And as you look at that cycle of a business, the business life cycle, things change and technology needs to change with it. And right now, that's the big challenge. So there's no real good answer as to how to achieve this speed while protecting those coveted assets of the firm, right? The employees, the data, the secret information. Our hypothesis, my hypothesis, but our hypothesis at KPMG with innovation is by applying this startup mindset, the large firms can achieve success, spend significantly less money, and speed up the technology adoption. And by doing so on this smaller scale that ramps up quickly.
So the digital duplicate is something that allows you to work at that small scale, test it out, and then scale it if it works. And of course, you start with information. Information can inspire people. Information can highlight or signal potential opportunity in the future. And the minute there's an opportunity, you'll find people writing about it or putting information out there on the internet. So I'm going to ask you to blow your own trumpet a little, if that's okay. Where do you fit in as David Jarczyk? And what's the particular perspective that makes you and then KPMG's approaches stand out?
So what we stumbled upon, and really we stumbled upon it, blockchain was a technology that was out there, no different than if you to your point, read the press, 5G, artificial intelligence, etc. And our firm is working on all of those, but blockchain was one that I was asked to just take a look at agnostically. Is this a technology that can actually help our clients in any way, shape, or form? That was really my mandate, and I give kudos to our Chief Innovation Officer who said that. As we started playing around with it, the first thing we noticed is, yes, we want our perspective to be beyond cryptocurrency. I think there's a place for cryptocurrency. Certainly there's tax and finance and accounting implications with cryptocurrency, but I don't see that as being no one on the team saw that as being the aha moment. The aha moment really came when we took a look at the underlying pieces of blockchain. This idea of distributed ledger, multiple parties, and cryptography, right? Being able to have an immutable ledger that frankly no one can break through. And we said to ourselves, wow, when we talk to our clients in the startup methodology, we simply ask them what are their pains. And their pains are the following. First, they have way too many data sets in way too many locations all across the globe internally, let alone with their suppliers and customers. Number two, they spend most of their time just tracking that down and trying to get it to reconcile. And number three, once they've done that, they actually have no confidence that the data they're looking at is correct or hasn't changed, because that takes time to reconcile data. So we saw something beautiful in blockchain, which was, hey, it can actually act as that connection. And I always use the analogy, which I don't know why, it has nothing to do with my age, but, remember the old days and the old great films where you'd pick up the phone in the hotel and the operator would have to take a plug and plug it into one of the many nodes. And on the other end, there's an operator who plugs that into the another node, and that's how you used to connect telephones. Blockchain is sort of that type of technology. It's a technology that links all these different data systems. And our point of view is one enterprise can use that technology to pull together that information, to connect its suppliers, to connect its manufacturing plants, its distributors, its sales force, and its customers. And now you've got all that data trusted sitting in one ledger. Think of the power behind that fact.
That's certainly something that if people look ahead and they say, right, that potential is massive, and it seems for most of us to be just around the corner, but there's a lot of hard work to do before that really delivers. And you started talking a little bit about the old phone systems going back in time. So I'm going to do what many people possibly dream of doing and hit rewind and ask you to go back in time and talk about disruptions that you saw perhaps 10 years ago, because disruption is always with us. Things have always been changing. So I'm going to invite you to take us back a few years, perhaps when you first joined KPMG, perhaps beforehand. What was the last big disruption that you saw in the industry, and what did it mean for the organizations with which you were working back then?
It's actually interesting. So from a small business perspective, going back anything beyond 2 years ago is the perspective I have. And then I've done the research in the time from a KPMG perspective. Coming from a small business, it was actually amazing. The greatest disruption was the likes of an Amazon or Google building tools for entrepreneurial development. It used to be that you could start a business in a garage like Bill Gates, but you'd be writing every little piece of code and making stuff up. And God bless that. That's true entrepreneurship and development. With the likes of Amazon and Google and others and many small businesses, what has happened is a game changer. Basically, anyone can sit down in their garage, in their basement, wherever it may be, start coding and take it from there. What happened was it actually magnified the ability of the garage entrepreneur to disrupt the big players. So that was already out there, going back to Bill Gates in that example. But now imagine a Bill Gates many years later who has these software widgets and tools that allow him to be even more nimble and quick. It's remarkable. My son, who is 7, is using Lego widgets to literally make his Legos light up, move trains, move cranes, switch tracks, and he's creating his own city, and that city has its own personality based on a tablet app function. That is a game changer for small businesses. Ironically, it's a game changer for large firms, and part of the reason I'm at KPMG. It used to be for these large firms, the greatest disruption would come from the big companies. But now you don't know who's creating what in a small business. As a matter of fact, KPMG just had about a year ago, a wonderful acquisition of a company called Bookly, which is now called Spark. Started by this amazing group of folks, these amazing entrepreneurs. They were into skateboarding and sold skateboards and had to do accounting. You can imagine skateboarders don't like doing accounting, and there was no easy way to do so. So this really smart dude, Zach, and his team created accounting software for small businesses so they can go skateboard. Well, we acquired them because they ended up being something that could potentially disrupt the status quo. What a great business plan.
So I'm going to then use the skateboarding term to kick and push into the present and talk about what's happening now. Because when it comes to blockchain, which is where you do most of your work at the moment, who do you think it affects the most? And what does that mean in practice?
When I look at the possibility or the potential of this technology, and again, we're doing this in that startup mindset. So as you suggested, and I highlight, underscore, bold, and italicize, there's much research and work to be done. The greatest benefit is going to come to two sets of people. First, and selfishly because of my job, to the large organizations. When you have large organization, one company, name your company, has multiple affiliates across the globe. All those affiliates have multiple systems, and those systems rarely speak to each other. And then you multiply that by their third party or relationships with suppliers and vendors and distributors and customers and FedEx and UPS and logistics systems, etc. And then throw in governments and compliance, whether it's tax, whether it's SEC, whether it's FAA in the case of airlines and airplane parts. Imagine a world where all of that data can be linked in one single ledger. Again, I stress to you that is where the R&D and the greatest beneficiaries are going to come from. The second set of people or group who is going to benefit from this is us as consumers. I was actually laughing the other day. I went swimming with my family, and, like a good dad, I took my cell phone into the lake and took a picture, dropped the phone, and there it went 20 feet down. So I lost everything. I went and got a new phone. And here I am putting in my password to all the different apps again for security reasons, filling out the similar information, etc., etc. If you look at countries like Luxembourg or Estonia or even Poland now, they are running pilots that say, hey, users, put your information in one spot secured by the government, and it can be utilized by all those apps and securely so that you only have to enter your information one time. Think about the time savings there as well.
Well, talking of time, I need to break for a couple of seconds and remind our listeners that we will be continuing our conversation shortly as KPMG's David Jarczyk tells us more about how we can keep track of everything as our companies undergo their digital transformations, whatever technology they may be leading with. He'll also tell us about how to ensure that the people are always kept at the core of these transformations and how global partners can manage the process so that no company, no office lags behind, no matter how far they may be from head office. All of that is coming up later in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more about this podcast and about the rest of our wider project at gobeyonddisruption.com. And if you've just discovered this podcast, if you're listening to one of these episodes for the first time, remember you can subscribe via your podcast app and have a browse through our old episodes, because that's where you'll find a lot more about this topic as well as plenty of others. We've got close to 100 conversations which focus on how technology is changing the profession, and which also focus on how we as professionals are rising to those challenges, how we're identifying opportunities and using our human intelligence to stay ahead of the curve. Talking of which, we are talking to David Jarczyk of KPMG in Chicago. He's telling us about blockchain and how to use the concept of digital duplicates to drive and speed up tech adoption across a large or multinational company. So, David, let's talk about some examples of how you've used this startup mindset and that concept of digital duplicates to pioneer these new processes. And these are processes that can make sense from a practical business perspective. It's more than just theory. I've heard you say in the past that small drives big. So what does that mean?
Let me tell you a client story which I think could help everyone visualize this. So we had a real client that had a real problem, a major multinational, and they were having difficulty tracking aircraft parts that they manufacture from location to location. Now, we could all imagine why that's a problem. One, for the company itself. Certainly you want to know where your inventory is and ensure safety. But secondly, because it's a regulated industry, when we're talking about all these nuts and bolts and rivets that you see when you get onto a plane, every single one of those nuts, bolts, and rivets, every single one have a certificate. Let's say for the FAA in the United States or for the European Union, wherever it may be. The challenge was that each and every manufacturing plant had different systems. And those different systems would capture the information once that piece was in their possession. But how do you link that? So the client wanted to solve this problem and was open to being an early adopter of any new technology. Now, historically, what I've seen happen is you do what's called a waterfall approach. A bunch of well-dressed consultants or techies would come in from large corporations, right? Just in their ties and say, listen, we have the solution for you. We're going to go ahead and build out this huge system that links everybody up immediately. We'll call it something like a data warehouse. We're going to spend lots and lots of money on this, and it's going to work. And boy, it's going to be great. But I think we also know the stories, whether it's in jest or in reality, from newspapers, magazines, and books of how nothing turns out the way you plan. It's like building a house, right? Cost overruns, time, etc. Problems happen. So instead of looking at it in that waterfall approach, we took the startup view at KPMG. We said, how can we solve this problem nimbly and quickly and cheaply? So we created a pilot program. All it did was link two individual plants, one in Poland and one in the UK. We utilized that blockchain technology we created a digital duplicate to allow those two technology systems to speak to each other. So here's that concept of digital duplicate. The old process continued. The duplicate was created to see that we can actually accomplish something. And it worked. We could track the nuts and the bolts and etc. from Poland to the UK. So obviously, once that pilot was created and that digital duplicate was in place, we then implemented what was called our implementation plan or our succession plan. And we would roll it out And the way we would roll it out is first we lifted it to a second plant. And in this case, let's pretend that second plant was in Germany. That worked. As a startup, you now have two great examples of this digital duplicate working. So now you're ready for full scale rollout, whatever the systems may be, and you plan based on regions or importance or risk or whatever it may be. But you can see that those first few months of just trying this out with two entities or two affiliates and then three, boy, that doesn't cost a lot of money. Boy, it doesn't take a lot of time. Mistakes will happen, but they get fixed on a smaller scale. And then this thing is ready to blow up into a full-fledged application. That's a lot different than the scenario of the waterfall approach that I just shared with you. So that's a real story.
Small drives big. Okay, so let's move from the computers now to the canteen. Let's talk about the people who are doing the work, the folks who are testing the processes, who may be inputting the data, sitting there at the keyboard, and then the teams that are rolling it out to the businesses on the ground as they scale. That's all very well, but ultimately when you come to a big business, there's a C-suite, and they sometimes sit quite far from where this small-scale testing is happening. So it's no surprise that they can sometimes overlook perhaps the crucial importance of the live human element that links all of these digital initiatives. What do you think the C-suite needs to remember? What are some of the things they may sometimes overlook when this is all happening? Or am I just assuming that perhaps they're more out of touch than they actually are? Because they're at KPMG, I'm sure you're seeing better practices perhaps we can learn from.
Yeah, I'll start there. At KPMG, going from a small business environment as an entrepreneur to a big four, I think it sounds cool, but again, some might disregard the amount of stress and anxiety in that decision that I made. That's a very scary prospect for all the things you just said. The reason I did choose KPMG over other firms is there's no question that the leadership that I spoke to was fully invested in innovation. And one of the mandates I received is disrupt our business. Literally disrupt our business. And that's the type of mentality that I believe succeeds. I'm fortunate because my last small business dealt in innovation, specifically in intellectual property that's developed by multiple firms all across the world. And I was able to see how the R&D teams, the innovation teams worked, not only with the general counsel's office, but with the CEOs and the COOs and the CFOs of the firms. So I don't think that you're incorrect. Firms themselves are conservative for the most part. Their job is to stay in business, to make a profit, and not to do anything that loses them customers and puts them out of business. This is my personal perspective, but I believe people in their jobs are actually conservative as well. So that has nothing to do with their personal lives, but in their jobs, they don't want to make mistakes. They're afraid to make mistakes. They definitely don't want to get fired. This is their income. This is their livelihood. So what you have is a culture that is conservative, that leads to fear of failure, fear of trying new things. It is my absolute hypothesis, but I would say it's a must-have. Leadership needs to show by example. They must create that environment where people are allowed to fail and all ideas are sacred. I've seen situations where ideas are presented, good and bad, and those ideas are listened to, understood, and reflected upon. That's a great situation, because even if that idea is bad, that human being will come back with another idea. You've opened the door for innovation. I've then seen the reverse, or the opposite. I've seen an idea being brought up and that person being told everything that's wrong with that idea. Why on earth would that person ever give another idea? So this must come from the C-suite and be pushed out. It cannot come from the other way. I'll leave this with one last comment. In the various firms that I've worked with over the years, I've had the pleasure of working with everyone from CEOs to CFOs all the way down to just managers and staff. And when you look at that, some of the greatest ideas come from the staff as well as the middle management, the ones in the field doing the work. Think about the number of ideas that are missed if you don't listen to those ideas.
That can work all the way from where we are, all the way up to head office. So as you've said, if it's all coming together very nicely in the C-suite, what about a company's other offices across the country or in other countries in the case of a global multinational? You've got to roll stuff out so that things don't lag behind. Everyone's moving at the same pace together. If that doesn't happen, then the global organization may be threatened or put at risk by the slow pace of tech adoption of their overseas entities. Or perhaps they're not picking up on new ways of working the way things may be changing at head office. So how does one keep everything moving at the right speed together and consistently?
Fortunately, I think with blockchain now, there's two great answers. That first answer is the legacy answer, which is, I go back to my previous statement. It starts with the CEO and the HQ, and then the leaders of those offices. I'm sure it's easy for me to say, as I've never been the CEO of a huge multinational company, but I believe it falls on that senior C-suite leadership to ensure the affiliates are keeping up. That's just my personal suggestion or perspective. However, along the way, technology is improving that allows for fixes in those types of situations. They may not be the full solution, but technology enables the solution. So I'll go back to blockchain. You recall I said I'm agnostic to blockchain. The truth is I'm falling in love with blockchain. Here is why. That technology is, in some ways, think of it as a big brother for a firm. It sits there and it listens to all the systems in place for that firm, all those affiliates. And it grabs the information that's necessary to do business. What does that mean? Well, at least in the short term, it means that those affiliates overseas can keep their processes, have minimal friction to change, and really keep doing business the way they're doing while the C-suite works to get them up to speed. In the meantime, what does that mean for the global organization? Well, you now have blockchain running in place and gathering that information we discussed that, while not perfect perhaps because of the old systems, it is a very powerful tool of information that can be used to generate anything from returns to sales to just great customer service.
Can blockchain identify whether things are moving at the right speed? Because, of course, if it's a ledger is surely just a record, but does blockchain offer something more than just a ledger? Can it give one a sense of how those assets are being used?
You are really stepping into a wonderful world, and this is the world where my passion kicks off. So we come to going back to what is KPMG's view on blockchain. Blockchain is part of an elegant solution. It is not the solution in my point of view. Blockchain is pulling together that information just as we discussed. And then to your point, now how do you analyze that information, right? How do you make decisions based on that information? Or even more so, how do you, instead of react to it, how are you proactive to the information that's in there in order to drive a better business or a better customer experience? Other technologies, other apps and artificial intelligence and et cetera, things that haven't even been created yet. Those are the types of analytical tools that can now be used. What blockchain offers you is some clean, awesome data that you can verify and you know has not been corrupted. You know it hasn't been changed to now take action on. This is a lifelong problem. I remember as a young shaver with hair and not a gray beard in college, learning in Finance 101. The problem is getting good data to run financial analysis. Blockchain is offering the potential to do that for companies.
You talked about the risk averse in a company, and based on what you've just said now, a business case may seem clear to someone who may be a technical director or an operations manager, but let's say they understand the business case. Now, what they need to do is, once they've got all their info tech and the technological ducks in a row, they now have to get support that reassures their managers or the directors or the C-suite that it's okay to take this leap into the use of this new tech, be it blockchain or whatever they may be evaluating. So how would you suggest that someone in middle or senior management can reassure and get the support of those at the top of an organization so that they feel comfortable to connect the opportunities that the technology offers with their business objectives?
So we actually run into this situation with every new client. And the question is, how do we ensure that buy-in and that support? And the answer that I continually come to is, and it may sound counterintuitive to the nimble, fast pace of a startup, but the idea is, spending an hour or two up front saves hundreds of hours at the back end. It's bring in all the stakeholders into the process right from the start. If you have to have those 3 weeks of meetings to satisfy their questions, concerns, queries, their legacy fears, the marks on their back from past mistakes, I think that is part of implementing any good new process in any culture, whether it be technology or any other innovation. And then from there, it is on the sponsor, the person who really wants this to take place, to show and prove the minimal cost to test the hypothesis under a startup model, and then to show, again, the minimal negative impacts from applying this methodology. I think what happens is many of us have a tendency to think through the negative and play scenarios in our heads that say, what if this goes wrong? What if this goes wrong? And I'm a part of it. I think answering those questions, showing that under a startup lean methodology, there's minimal cost, minimal risk. I think any of us would take that time and take that bet. It's a much different bet than you might see in Las Vegas.
Okay, so that definitely makes sense from the perspective of a large corporate structure. But now I'm going to take you back to your kind of roots, where you were working in startups, and now you are working via a startup model, which is set up differently to a big corporate, because these smaller digital duplicates that you're talking about run much more nimbly with a much flatter structure, and they won't have a C-suite to worry about. How much does that apply to larger businesses in the future? Because if the digital duplicates are startup style businesses without C-suites, how relevant are they for a larger business with a C-suite?
There is no question that even in 18 months now at KPMG, this is a challenge that I even face with all the support that I have. And I want to clarify, I'm saying challenge, not problem. The challenge is what happens when there is the C-suite. Historically, as you suggested, a decision is made, the risks are weighed, and an outcome happens, and you pivot or die, right? That's a small business mentality. What happens in situations at large firms that we've seen is sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen. One of the greatest things that can happen, and also the worst, is everyone's passionate about innovation. Everyone wants a solution. Their heart's in the right place, but you cannot come to a consensus on what that solution is. Other things that take place are corporate risk. Every single multinational has its own risk and security procedures that require and should be in place and require certain things to take place or not take place. So I think that's part of the journey I'm still on. I started it 18 months ago. I'm working on it within KPMG and with our clients. And I think I still fall back on the hypothesis that you include the stakeholders from day one. I think the many hours up front save countless hours on the back end and help the project to succeed. I'll stick to that answer, and then how about we talk in another year and see where I'm at?
That sounds like a good plan to me. All right, so let's go back to our listener, because we've got people in all sorts of different organizations, in all sorts of different situations, working in different environments, be that culturally, professionally, at different stages of their career. But one of the things that all of them will absolutely want to do is keep ahead of the curve in a fast-changing business environment. So I'm going to ask for your help here, because from your perspective and your experience, which has taken you from the startup and entrepreneurial world into an organization the size of KPMG, what's the next disruption that you see coming?
I think we've touched upon it briefly with your insight that you asked your question on. We now have all this data. I mean, this was a problem from before. All this data, too much data. But now we have all this data in one reconciled place. So that was the next step, right? Too much data, we can't do anything with it. Now we've got all this data and it's reconciled. It's proven. It's accurate. It's a single ledger of truth. Holy cow, what is the next problem? What do I do with this data? What is possible? Economists, financial analysts, and take it beyond the businesses, those in public policy, governments, and even social welfare and well-being. The amount of information that is out there, how are we going to make it do work for us, answer those questions for us? And that's where I think the implications of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, any new technologies that are coming out that we haven't even discovered yet, that is what's going to drive the future. So assume that the R&D project of connecting and reconciling data will be done in the next few years as blockchain or some other technology solves that problem. If I was a listener, I would say, where can I be most impactful in analyzing that data? Because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
All right. Well, let's talk about that impact. If you want to leave some impact for people to take away with them at the end of our conversation, I'm going to ask you to do some signposting for anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic in general, but also about your work and KPMG's work in particular. What are some resources you'd recommend, some websites to visit? What are some great places to start?
My professor, Dr. Hurt in Finance 101, who remains a great mentor to me, said to us on the first day of class, even before I knew I liked finance, he said, everyone's reading the Wall Street Journal. Pick up the Financial Times and read it instead. You just get a different perspective, even if you don't believe it, and that makes you smarter. And it was a tongue-in-cheek joke, but to some extent, it's correct. And that's not a knock on Wall Street Journal or a plug for Financial Times. What I think he meant by that statement, and what I took away from that statement, is maybe instead of spending our time reading what the common literature says, I actually suggest going to Google Alerts and setting up technology alerts for everything from blockchain to 5G to Internet of Things. Read those opinion pieces, read the information that's out there, actually even read the sponsored ads. Try to come up with your own interpretation of where technology is going. It will help you see a big full picture. And then as you're doing your work, I think it just sort of clicks. I read something about this and how someone else solved this problem. I think that's the most powerful thing. And then I'll say something as an entrepreneur, and I get often criticized this. So if you want to send me hate email, please do so. The challenge is, as an entrepreneur, I read startup books, I read entrepreneurial books, I read business process books, trying to do the best I could as an entrepreneur. And for me, what I recognized was most of those books are written from a perspective of someone who succeeded. One chapter talks about the hardship and 20 chapters talk about the success. Well, I don't know any entrepreneurial story that really works that way. It should be the opposite. The 20 years of depression, ups and downs, issues, HR, legal, tech, bugs in the systems, etc. And then the last few years where something went well or the business shut down. So in saying that, one of my suggestions is, hey, that's fine. Read any books that you'd like, but I'd like to point out a couple books that I think are worthwhile. The first one is called Crossing the Chasm by Thomas More. I think that is a book that will help anyone, whether they're a CEO or the sponsor at the mid-level, help implement new technologies in a way that makes sense within an organization. And then the second one is called The Lean Startup. And The Lean Startup is a book by Eric Ries. And it's a great framework for what we're talking about here, which is a startup methodology. Don't do the waterfall, but go piece by piece and minimize cost, time, and risks. And it's a great book. So those are two sources I would share.
Super. We'll pop links to both of those in our show notes. Now, we're not encouraging hate mail. We are encouraging connection. So where can people find you online?
So the best places to find me are on LinkedIn, and it's just D Jarczyk, so DJARCZYK. I'm sure we'll post that. and on Twitter, which is at David Jarczyk. And on there, you will actually see my version of the Google alerts that I think are most important, as well as other leaders that I'm connected with, both from the big firms as well as from my small business community. And I thank everyone for all their thoughts that I'm allowed to just pass on and make it seem like I'm smarter than I am.
Well, David, you're clearly a sharer, so let's get one more share out of you. What's one actionable suggestion you'd like to leave for accounting and finance professionals that will help them go beyond disruption?
For me, it's simple. It's don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. I really recommend people to stop being that conservative person. Go ahead and provide your ideas. Do so in a way that allows others to come to the answer that you're trying to achieve, though, right? Don't do so in a very forceful way. Realize that people are afraid of technology, disruption, and innovation, but by asking questions to lead them to the answer you want, you should have success. And if you find that your crazy ideas and passion are being criticized or you're being punished for it, it's time to find a new place to work. That simple in my mind.
Great place to end our conversation today. And there's plenty more to explore about blockchain and how the entrepreneurial mindset can power a much bigger organization than just a startup. So, of course, our show notes will have links to all the resources that David's just mentioned. And you can find those links and our show notes simply by clicking on the episode's info icon in your podcast app on your smartphone or tablet just as soon as you finish listening. You can also open this episode in your computer's web browser and then click through to the show notes. You'll find everything right there. And that's on Apple devices, Android devices, or on any computer. Now, there are two other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further. If you're already using the AICPA store, then go to aicpastore.com/go-beyond-disruption or the cgmastore.com/go-beyond-disruption. That's where you'll find courses, professional development resources, and webinars, plus our podcast. That will help keep you ahead of the curve. That's exactly what our guest, David Jarczyk of KPMG in Chicago, has been doing. We'd like to thank him. And of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go share it. Tell someone about it. You can even email us using the feedback link in our show notes, because we'd love to know what you think and what you'd like to hear more of. From the office of the AICPA in SEMA in the heart of the City of London, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.